Welcome to the Informed Pregnancy and Parenting Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Elliot Berlin. Today's episode is a pregnancy and birth story that includes a rare but serious pregnancy complication. My guest has an undergraduate master's degree in sociology and library science. She is a software developer in North Carolina and also the proud mother of a new baby boy. Her journey to motherhood had some bumps in the road, but despite the hurdles, she's crossed the finish line and has graciously offered to share her story. Kelly Potter, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Dr. Berlin. I really appreciate you being here and having me.
It's my pleasure. And also, we pretty much end every podcast by saying if you have any topics that you'd like us to explore or talk about, just reach out. You can always reach out by Instagram or email. And I bet some people think, they probably don't really pay attention to it. But we do. We listen to every single one, and that's how we were able to connect with you.
Yeah, I was actually kind of shocked. I went back just out of curiosity to look through the podcast that you had done and didn't see anything about HELLP syndrome. And so I thought, that would be an excellent topic to discuss sometime, because it was definitely nothing that I had ever heard of when I was told by my doctors that was what I had.
Yeah, and HELLP syndrome, which is the complication that you had, is not really common, and we, in fact, don't have an episode about it. But we're going to share your story, and then on our next episode, we're going to bring in an obstetrician to talk about it from the more clinical perspective. But let's start at the beginning. Where are you from?
All over. I was born in upstate New York and spent my formative years outside of Chicago. And I came south for college and never left. So I've been in North Carolina for almost 20 years. I'm actually officially a Southerner now, which is very weird to me.
I kind of hear it in your accent a little bit.
No, I don't think I'm ever going to get the accent. And if this baby ends up with an accent, I'm not sure I can love him.
There's just a little twinge. I actually hear it. I lived in the South for a little while. I just hear it.
It's a fun place to be. And, I'm really lucky to be where I am, actually. And, I've been in Durham for a long time now. So it's home now.
Making software.
Yeah, that's a weird one considering my background in
sociology to software.
Library science. Yeah, that was not a normal path. But the company that I work for is, they highly value finding talent in strange places. And that ended up working out really well for me. And I've been there for almost 15 years now.
I feel like with library science, you have to be extremely organized.
Yes, and that indeed is a trait that I have. And that's actually why they hired me, because I could do research really well, and they needed somebody to do research on a product that they had. And I morphed that into software development somehow, and I'm not the best software developer, but I try every day to learn more so that they have no reason to fire me, because I love the job.
The librarian at our local public library is an app developer, so there you go.
Yeah, you have to, especially in this day and age, you have to have many hats. And that's actually a good thing, I think, just in general.
Now you have the mommy hat.
Yeah, that's a weird one that I definitely never expected to occur.
Because you didn't want to have kids originally?
No, not necessarily. I never really had given it a whole lot of consideration. In my head, I thought to myself that, I'll find a person. And when I find that person, then, maybe I will, maybe I won't want children. But as I started getting closer to the age of 40, I started kind of thinking about it a little bit more seriously, because I knew that window was going to close for me very soon. And, after about 2 years ago, I thought, let me just explore this option and see if it would even be possible for me to have a child on my own. And I was able to, hook up with a really great fertility clinic here. And they were very enthusiastic, even considering my age. And they worked very hard, and it actually did happen. And, in my head, I was prepared for either one. If I got pregnant, then it was meant to be. And if I didn't, then that was also okay.
So, getting pregnant on your own, it still seems like there were some options.
Oh, yeah. And it's funny because I have friends that got pregnant through a known donor. And, when I was thinking about it, I decided a sperm donor would be the best way to go, because I wanted, I selfishly, I guess, wanted to have my baby all to myself and not have to worry about any kind of consequence there. And, that was an interesting process in and of itself. It's very strange. It's like Tinder for children. You just have to go through and figure out what you want your child to look like. And it's a very strange process. And it was very weird, but it was, it all turned out pretty well.
So for you, it was an anonymous donor through an agency?
Yeah, so it was anonymous, but, one of the things that I decided I wanted to do was to make sure that it was a donor that was willing to openly share their information when the children turned 18, because I didn't want my child, if I had one, to grow up not knowing anything or not ever being able to find out, because to me that question mark over, themselves, their whole life wouldn't be fair. So I wanted to at least give them the option to find out as much as they could about their donor when the time was right.
So when you work with a sperm donor, is it intrauterine insemination?
Yeah, so the fertility clinic, there's definitely different options. We decided to start with IUIs because they're definitely the cheaper route and see how they go. And after 3 IUIs, the first one actually ended in miscarriage, but it was very early on.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
No, and it was shocking to get pregnant right off the bat, and it was even more of a kind of a roller coaster to lose it so fast as well, but it was definitely an introduction to the world of infertility. And by the time I hit the stage where we started to discuss IVF, through testing, what we realized was that I really didn't have very many eggs left. They have hormone levels that they can look at to see how many follicles that you possibly have left. And my number, even though I was only 39 at that point, was much lower than what somebody would normally see. So even for my age, I had very few eggs. We decided to try IVF anyway.
You hadn't frozen eggs?
No,
Okay.
And that's unfortunately it's still a very expensive process. Essentially going through IVF up into the point of inseminating, and bringing them back in. And so that process in and of itself is very expensive. And, when you're 25 or 30 even, and if you don't have everything together necessarily, you're definitely not trying to spend that kind of cash. So it's definitely, and that was not anything I had ever considered. So for me, it was, IVF wasn't going to work.
So you did a few rounds of IUI?
Yeah, tried IVF for 1 round. It was a lot of hormones. I never made more than 1 or 2 eggs. And by the time we hit IVF and I was doing the shots, I still didn't make more than 2 eggs. And it wasn't worth the expense really to try and extract them at that point. So we just continued with IUI after that. And,
so you did stimulation for an IVF cycle, but you never retrieved the eggs?
Exactly. Yeah, we ended up switching to IUI that month just because there just were no eggs.
Right. So IUI, in case somebody doesn't know, is you're essentially taking that sperm and using a little catheter to place them into your uterus near your fallopian tube.
Children off right at school. There's no middleman. Their lunch is packed and everything is good. And the nice thing about sperm donors is that they're so selective in their process to be a sperm donor that the sperm donors themselves have very high ratios of sperm. Their sperm are like super sperm. So it's about the best chance you can get. I ended up switching sperm donors halfway through the process because I wasn't having any luck with the first one. And I had enough money to buy 2 more vials because FYI, it's pricey stuff. I paid about $1,000 a vial.
Wow.
Yeah, and I did it 6 times. So
wow.
So next time you're wondering about that, it's a lot of money.
You wouldn't think, because
yeah, they these companies, they do a ton of genetic testing now. They do genetic testing, personality tests. There's profiles, interviews recorded. The family history is crazy extensive. The stuff that they really dig deep with these guys, and so they have to pay for that somehow, I suppose. And the end user ends up paying the price on that one.
And each time you do a cycle, it's 1 vial?
Yep. Yeah.
So you had 2 vials left?
Yes, I had 2 left, and the very last one that I tried worked. It was my very last try.
Oh, wow. Did you get the sense that it worked before you knew you were able to test for it? You felt it?
I did. Yeah, I told myself if this doesn't work, it will never work, because my numbers that month had been really, really stellar, very similar to the first month. My estrogen levels at that point, that's one of the things they use to kind of check the growth and the strength of the follicles that you have. They had been previously pretty low, but the first month had been really good, and this month was even higher than the first month. And so I told myself, this is it. It's happening or it's not happening, and it did.
Because you previously had a miscarriage, were you nervous even though you found out you were pregnant?
Oh, yeah. I don't know that any person that's ever had a miscarriage doesn't harbor some kind of, stepping away from that a little bit to just give it some time. It's hard to emotionally invest for a while. And honestly, it was even, probably throughout the whole time, even though you get past all the markers and everything looks good, every single time you go for another test, you're just not sure, and for me, at my age, it was something, I did a lot of other tests too. So that's really hard to get past. It is, but
you did it.
But I did, yeah, and
it
was different from the very beginning. So I knew it would. He was a strong one in there, and
literally from the first minute, this baby had already overcome some odds stacked against you.
Yeah, it really was sort of miracle on that one that it even worked, and I felt very, very lucky.
Honestly. It was meant to be.
Yeah.
All right, let's take a little break now that you're pregnant in our story and find out a little bit more about your pregnancy. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Informed Pregnancy Podcast. We're talking to Kelly Potter. Well, it took a bit, but you got pregnant. How was your pregnancy? How did it feel once you got deeper into the pregnancy? How was your first trimester?
I felt that I had spent enough money to have warranted an easy pregnancy.
If only you could buy that.
Yeah, and indeed, the first part was actually very, very nice. I really didn't have a ton of nausea, nothing that a little food, you just realize after a while, even though you feel like trash, you have to eat something because it will make you feel better. And, you get through that, and it really, for me, wasn't terrible at all. And so I felt pretty lucky in that way. And I really didn't hit any kind of real issues until probably the second trimester. I ended up having fairly severe, at least in my mind, carpal tunnel.
Oh, in both hands or one?
Yeah, it was in both hands too.
You're a computer person.
Yeah, that was special.
Oh, wow. Did you try anything to treat it?
I had all throughout my pregnancy and during fertility treatments, saw an acupuncturist who was also a Chinese herbalist. So the acupuncture did help quite a bit with the carpal tunnel.
Oh, good.
Yeah, it was rough. But even then, I still told myself, could be worse. This is not that bad. I will be fine. This will be okay. You just learn to sleep in very few positions, and it ends up being okay at the end. But yeah, that was rough. But my OB, even though I was what I would call old and what most medical doctors would call old, I turned 40 in my first trimester.
They call it geriatric.
Yes, indeed.
Pregnancy.
But, my OB was they were pretty chill about it, honestly. They, I asked them, I was like, am I high risk? And they said, no, not until you do something or show us something that's going to make you high risk. And
that's really cool.
Yeah. I wasn't 100% sure I would be able to find a doctor that would do that and have that kind of mentality, because, you hear horror stories about people, having these issues with their doctors, and mine was really great about it, and it made me feel normal throughout the pregnancy. Honestly, they weren't pushy. They said, yeah, you'll have some extra tests, and if everything looks good, then it's going to be fine, and you'll deliver at the hospital that is the low risk pregnancy center, and you'll be fine.
Did you do testing? Did you do any of the early on testing? Did you do extra testing?
Yeah, I did whatever they offered, essentially. I have really good insurance. Thank you, company. I would honestly shout out to them. I've been able to have done any of this. They pay for fertility treatments up to $20,000.
That's amazing.
Yeah, no, there's no way I would have been able to have gone through this process without that. There's just, there wasn't any way. So I feel very lucky in that. And Yeah, and so my insurance covered all of the things that were necessary, and we did do genetic testing, and it allowed me to see the baby quite a bit more because you get a lot more ultrasounds in those cases. So we got to see him quite a bit, which was fun. But no, none of those were. He passed all his tests with flying colors. He was measuring big throughout, and he was doing pretty well. And it was me that had the problem, not him.
Oh, yes. So
it was great.
I mean, outside of the carpal tunnel, what else did you experience?
Yeah, that was. I mean, it's an interesting process. Feeling the baby move for the first time, knowing what to expect, and honestly, your podcast really helped me there because I like to do my research, obviously. And I had read a few books. I wasn't going to get crazy, but being able to hear people actually converse on subjects, it's just a much better way of really kind of ingesting information that you want to keep. Having conversations is something that we don't do. Well, we definitely currently only do it through things like this now. But, it's kind of a lost art, the art of storytelling and, the older generations passing down information to the younger generations in that way. People Google things and they forget to ask other people that have had similar experiences. And so I think that this format really, I'd put it on in my car on my way to work and, make my friends listen to it. And it was just a nice way to start conversations about things that weren't necessarily always at the tip of your tongue.
Well, then we'll keep making them.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. And all the people that are currently listening appreciate it too, I'm sure.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, so you started to feel less well at some point in your pregnancy.
Yeah, it was early in my third trimester when I started seeing some weird stuff.
Like what?
Well, and it's interesting now, looking back on it, hindsight, the first time I felt any kind of strange, my OB had kind of written it off as indigestion. I had just had the glucose test, and also they had given me, because of my age, any number of other risk factors, they had given me a 24-hour test for my urine to check for protein. Just because of the, all of those things, they wanted to make sure, for sure, that I didn't have any kind of risks of preeclampsia. And I had passed that test not 2 weeks prior. So throughout, my blood pressure had been fine. So when things started to go badly, they went badly real fast, but they weren't so acute that it wasn't easy to pass off as something else, is the thing. So the first symptoms that I had was a very strange pain in my upper back. That I know, and it kind of traveled around to my front. It was just like that whole circular, right under my rib cage, and it happened twice in a row, like in the evenings.
Oh, just like a fleeting pain?
Yeah, it almost came in a wave, and it lasted for maybe 45 minutes or an hour, and I'm like, this is not normal. This is weird. And, after the second day, I was like, I've got to ask the doctor about this. And I had an appointment that week, and she said, your stomach's in weird spots. It's probably indigestion. And I was like, well, that's some indigestion like I have never had before. But it never happened again. So I kind of wrote it off. What it probably was in hindsight now was actually my gallbladder. But your gallbladder and your liver are very close to each other.
Yeah.
And so I'm not sure if ultimately it did maybe turn itself on due to the other factors that occurred later or not, but it definitely was kind of that first indicator. I'm actually having my gallbladder removed on Monday. So,
oh, really?
Yeah, 2 surgeries in 1 year. It's very exciting. Wow. Yeah, that came back hardcore a couple of months after I gave birth, and so that thing's got to come out. It's very, very painful. Very painful. Yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy weird. I just assumed it would not come back because once I gave birth, I assumed all pain that I had previously would be gone.
Does it also, is it just pain or do you get nausea and vomiting? And
I did. Yeah, I finally did experience the whole gamut of that kind of pain after, it was probably a month ago. I ended up at the ER because this is just not normal.
Because of the pain?
Yeah, it was bad. And, I didn't get to go through birth, so I'm not sure how that equates.
Right.
But it was pretty intense. the pain. And I thought maybe I'm having a heart attack, because with women it's different. And the way the pain was, it was definitely close enough to the upper coordinate of my body that I just wanted to make sure, because it came along with, heart palpitations, and I felt really, really, really terrible. And my blood pressure was high.
How high, do you remember?
I got to bring home a blood pressure cup with me. It
Oh,
was probably like 150 over 90
oh
something.
wow, that was high.
It was bad. Yeah. And I didn't want, if this was still repercussions from the previous thing, I didn't want it to be something that I let go for too long. So I did wind up in the ER. And the person that checked me in was like, this is definitely your gallbladder. I'm like, why didn't somebody tell me this before? Why do you know so much? He's like, you're over 40-year-old woman and you just had a baby. That's
Right. I mean, when you're studying in school in healthcare sciences, they kind of put mnemonics for things,
yeah.
and it's not the nicest mnemonic that they have for gallbladder syndrome, at least in our school. But it was all the F's, so 40, fertile, fat, female.
Yeah.
Those were the four
Yeah.
F's.
Yeah, and
So,
I basically I was all of those, and so I don't know why that never came up previously, but I think that got overshadowed by all the other things.
by
And
the way,
so,
just so you know, the first patient who I ever saw with gallbladder disease was a skinny 19-year-old guy.
that's weird.
So he obviously didn't read the textbook,
Yeah,
and he baffled me for a while.
yeah,
Gallbladder was the last thing on my mind.
that's definitely not normal for sure. That's
So
strange.
you don't always know. So right when you got there, they knew your gallbladder was.
Oh yeah, he was like, this is definitely that, and a scan of that later on showed that there were a couple of issues in there, and
An
I.
ultrasound.
Yeah, they ultrasounded me. They did see some sludge, is what they like to call it.
Hmm.
And
Delicious.
I hope my acupuncturist doesn't listen to this because she definitely wants me to get rid of it with her herbs. But
Yeah.
and I would if I didn't have to take care of this child while I was also going through those attacks. But it's pretty painful and it's very difficult, and it scares me to think that I might have one when I actually need to be momming. And it's not that easy because they're very terrible. So this thing's got to come out. And so
Yeah.
I will.
It's extra hard as a single parent because it's one-on-one.
Well, and that's one of the things, with all these things that kind of occurred, it makes you stop and be a little scared, what happens. And, it was something I thought about before, obviously, but it definitely puts it in perspective when you're literally in some kind of pain or in some kind of scary situation like I was in, because you just don't know. And now anything that is wrong with me or could possibly in the future be wrong with me would affect him. And so
Right.
there's an added layer of stress on that for
And
sure.
responsibility. It's huge
Yeah.
responsibility. All right, Kelly, let's take a break and find out how this continued and how your ultimate birth and recovery went. We'll be right back with Kelly Potter. Welcome back to the Informed Pregnancy Podcast. We are talking to Kelly Potter. So, after a long journey to pregnancy and a pretty good first trimester, a little carpal tunnel pain, but then you start feeling these unusual symptoms, bleeding episodes of pain in your back wrapping around to the front. What happened after that?
Yeah, so a couple weeks after the initial problem began, what I assume was at least the precursor to that, I started feeling like I had the flu. And this all happened very fast. It was a Monday, and I was sitting in a meeting at work, and I clearly didn't look good. I only found that out later because everybody was like, oh, no, you look really bad. But, when you start to feel sick and you just go downhill really fast, and I really thought I just had like some kind of sickness, the flu or something. It was like getting hit by a brick wall. I felt hot and, just gross. So I went home and took my temperature, and I had a fever, which is not normal for me. So I went home, took Tylenol, and kind of went to bed and just hoped for it to go away. And it did to a certain extent. I was able to control the fever. The fever wasn't super high. And so I called my OB and told her what my symptoms were. I felt like I was coming down with something. And I did have a fever, but they weren't super concerned by the fever because it wasn't 100.4.
Mm-hmm.
And I had an appointment anyway on Thursday. So they were like, listen, if it gets worse, call us. If it stays the same, we'll just see you on Thursday and we'll talk about it. So, I actually started to sort of feel a little bit better, but the pain was weird. What it ended up being was that I would get a fever around the same time as I would have back pain. And they coincided, which is very strange. And so I would take something, the fever would go away, the back pain would kind of subside. But all of this happened very fast. And the symptoms none of it was that concerning. I just felt sick and very tired. And it sort of went away. By Wednesday, I felt okay again. And I decided I would try to go to work Thursday after I went to my OB appointment. So once I got to the OB's office, I really was expecting it to be kind of a cut and dry visit and then leave situation. It ended up not being like that, of course. I went in and they took my blood pressure, which of course is the very first thing they do. And it was high. It was probably 150 over something, maybe 85. She was like, and nurses are great. They're like, let's just take a second and try that again.
Yeah.
Yeah, see how that goes. And she didn't wait, though. Like a lot of times I'll be like, I'm just going to go do some paperwork and come back in 10 minutes while you breathe. But she took it again, and it ended up being much lower. It was like 132.
Okay.
So I was like, okay, beat that. That was a fluke. It was weird, but whatever. But because I'd had some strange symptoms earlier in the week, the doctor asked, she wanted me to pee in a cup just to check. And she came back and said, there is some protein in this. And so what we want you to do is go to the hospital and get the labs done that will come back fast, because they won't come back fast here. We just want to make sure. So they sent me to the hospital just to make sure. So, I valeted at the hospital. I drove myself, valeted at the hospital, and they, did a blood test. And it was really just a check to make sure I didn't have any kind of like preeclampsia.
How quick did you get the results?
It was fast. My brother showed up. He works at the hospital.
Oh, convenient.
It's all very convenient. I have many nurse friends at the hospital, and so it was all very just kind of, I just was annoyed that I had to be there. I had such a normal pregnancy up to that point that I really hated to have a mark on my grade, if you will. That's just the person that I am. I hate that. So I was more annoyed that I had to be there in the first place. I'm sitting there, and you can tell I've never been in a hospital before for anything ever. She handed me a robe and she was like, put this gown on, and I put it on backwards. I'm so used to being at the OB's office where, everything's out front. I don't know what to
do. What did you find when you got your blood work back?
Well, it's all kind of a blur at that point. They got my blood work back, and the attending physician came in with like 3 other people.
Oh boy.
And she sat on the bed, and she was like, listen, do you know why you're here? And I was like, I think you're just checking for preeclampsia, because, I knew people that had it, and they just, maybe kept him overnight, gave him some drugs, kept it under control, sent him home, said, watch it, make sure it's, you're not getting yourself stressed out. So even in my head, worst case scenario, I was going to be okay. It was going to be fine. So when she said, listen, we think that you have HELLP syndrome and we need to take the baby out, I started basically just bartering with her, because I'm like, listen, I'm almost 30 weeks. Can we just wait a couple of days?
Wow, you were just 30 weeks?
I was 29 weeks and 5 days.
Wow. That's so scary at that point. Had you ever heard of HELLP syndrome before?
No, never. And, I read a whole book.
On pregnancy?
I read a whole book on pregnancy and birth, and I'm like, why is it? No, it's such a random and weird thing, and they know very little about it just in general, that it's something that doesn't get talked about a whole lot, I think. And
it's HELLP, so there's 2 L's. And it's a combination of things. A syndrome is a combination of things. So hemolysis is where your red blood cells start to break down. That's the H. EL is elevated liver enzymes. And then LP is low platelet count, which is not a fun combination. Did they rate your case on severity?
They did. I had a platelet count of 60.
Oh,
which
wow.
Right at the cutoff for the most severe case.
Wow.
Yeah,
Well,
and
I imagine they didn't barter very much with you.
yeah, no, there wasn't any bartering. When they told me what it was, I basically said, listen, I don't want to know. Don't tell me. You're just going to freak me out. I'm not going to Google it. Let's just go on.
Yeah.
And I
So,
did. I really kind of went into self-preservation mode at that point because I knew what was about to happen was going to be scary. And they were like, we're going to deliver this baby now.
were you
And
allowed to be awake for the cesarean?
they offered that as a possibility, but they said that because of the low platelet count, they felt that it would be better if I was not awake.
General anesthesia.
Yeah, and I told them that was fine. I don't want to know or see any of this.
Mhm.
Wake me up when it's over. That's fine. I mean, and I guess that's a certain kind of way to deal with something. But honestly, and that was essentially how it happened. I walked into that place at 10 a.m. and he was born at 12:30.
Wow, you could still get your car from the valet.
Yeah, basically. Actually,
Oh
my
my
brother
goodness.
lost it later that week accidentally, so I had to file a police report. But
Oh
that's
boy. That's an incredible, just I'm putting that together in my mind,
yeah,
just from hey, not feeling great to going in
yeah,
at before even 30 weeks,
yeah.
how scary that is to have a baby that early, and then also just to find out that you're really very sick. Um,
Yeah, he was fine. They ultrasounded him. He was chilling in there, no problems.
but you were very sick. How
Apparently.
did he do with a premature birth?
So, I'm very lucky. I was at a stellar hospital, and I couldn't have been in a better place for the situation. Honestly, their NICU folks are amazing. I handed somebody my phone. She said she would take pictures,
Hmm.
and she did, and the
Well,
anesthesia,
that's nice.
yeah, they knocked me out. They gave me magnesium and steroids, and FYI, magnesium is no joke.
Oh, it's gnarly.
Yeah, I was not prepared for magnesium. That sucker was painful. But yeah, it was just all very fast, and he was out very fast. And side note, I woke up during the surgery and
No.
pulled out my breathing tube
Oh my
for,
goodness.
for extra fun.
Wow.
Yeah, that was good. I couldn't understand why my throat hurt so bad. I realized that I had a tube down my throat, but turns out they had to trach me twice.
That's insane.
Yeah, that was super.
Did they intubate you? They intubated
They
you twice.
did, yeah. They intubated me in the middle of the surgery again after I woke up. But from what I understand is when they do C-sections, they don't want to overkill it because the baby. And so it's possible that I just did not have enough.
Wow. Literally, because I didn't know your birth story until right now.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
mean, it's literally one
Another.
surprise after another. How
Yeah.
did you both recover?
It was A plus. I will say it was. I don't want to say it like I was proud of myself, but I was. I was never sure how. You never know how you're going to recover from something like that. And all my blood tests were pretty terrible at that point, but my platelets went up very fast after the surgery. My liver took a little longer. They were a little concerned about that, but it did eventually go back up in the right direction. It just took a little bit longer. I blamed the drinking in college for that. I'm not sure why, but yeah, it was. It took a little bit longer for that to recover, but I was fine. The C-section went well in general after the other problem, but I was up and out in 5 days, and I count myself as lucky. I've heard pretty terrible stories about HELLP syndrome, and a lot of people need transfusions and they end up in the ICU for a really long time.
How long was your little guy in the NICU?
He was great. He was a fat preemie. He was 2 pounds 15 ounces when he was born, so
Wow.
he was a pretty big preemie by their standards.
Yeah, for 30 weeks.
Yeah, so really the only thing he had to do was learn to breathe on his own. So he had a cannula for probably 3 or 4 weeks.
In the hospital?
Yeah, so he was in the NICU for 2 months.
2 months. Wow.
They tell you to expect that he will be there until he's supposed to be born.
Mm-hmm.
But he was able to come home a couple weeks early, which was good. After his lungs started developing and he started putting on weight, he grew like a champ.
That must be a surreal moment when your due date comes and your baby's over 2 months old.
Yeah, it was a very strange thing. He'll be under a corrected date for like a couple of years. And so he's a big preemie, but he's tiny for his real age kind of thing. But he's about 13 pounds now. He's cut up real fast. He's a good eater, and he has had no repercussions from this really whatsoever. His eyesight and hearing, which is, they're two of the things that they're most worried about when they come that early, have been fine. And
thankfully.
Yeah, he passed all his tests. So for the way it started out, the outcome really honestly couldn't have been better. And I'm very thankful for that, and, just the dedication of the hospital workers, because not a couple weeks later, they basically shut the hospital down,
Oh, because you had your baby right before the pandemic.
Yeah. And it's a very strange thing to go to a hospital every day during a pandemic, and you start out seeing this very busy, bustling place, and you think, okay, well, pandemic, it's going to be insane, but it was just a ghost town.
Yeah, the people stopped going for other things.
Yeah, they don't go for other things. They cancel elective surgeries.
Can't bring people with you.
Yeah, it's empty except for you. And I know those NICU nurses, it was a struggle for them because they want family there, because that's the one thing that really helps these preemies to be around their people and to have that skin-to-skin contact with their people and to have those visitors. But, those nurses in those NICU wards are now taking on like double duty. They're taking care of these babies, and they're also trying to kind of provide those babies with as much exposure as possible to other people while still being safe.
Impossible job. It's I'm
really
always so impressed and so grateful for the people who choose to spend their career doing that. It's invaluable.
And I see my friends every day that are nurses at the hospital, and they're powering through it like champs. And they are the most impressive to me, honestly, because they really take it all in stride.
Well, I don't know if you know this, but I had COVID, and I was in the ICU for a while, and, it was one person after another. Was just so amazing. Each of the doctors and the nurses and the different therapists, they were just really incredible and selfless and professional and compassionate.
Oh, yeah.
So grateful. Kelly.
Time for everybody.
What an interesting story. And, you climbed a giant mountain. And I really appreciate you coming on here to share it. We had not done an episode about HELLP syndrome, and so hopefully people won't experience it. It's not super common, but at least if you at least if you do, you can if you start having these symptoms like this, you can get on top of it early. And also, like I said, I'm going to have Dr. Michelle Tsai on our next episode talk about this from a much more clinical perspective. Yeah.
It's one of those things, you never really know how your pregnancy is going to go, and you just have to be open to the way that it will end up, and trust in the individuals that you have chosen to help you along the way, because really that's the most important thing. And if you can do that, then you can be calmer when stressful situations like mine do happen.
That's extremely well said. Thanks so much for joining us and for sharing your story at home. As always, thanks for listening to the Informed Pregnancy Podcast. If you like our program, share us with your friends and leave us some feedback in your podcast app. Kelly's living proof that we do read your correspondence and we get back to you, and your topics are important to us, and we'll cover them as soon as we can. And for more information, visit us online at informedpregnancy.com.
Give me the news, I got a whole lot of questions for you. This kid's gonna test my will, I got a lot to learn and my babies do.